Welcome to the U.S. Green Building Council of Texas Daylighting Best Practices presentation. My name is David McLean. I am chair of the USGBC Texas Best Practices Committee. This presentation is a companion to our Best Practices app, and today we are joined by Shivani Longer, who will enlighten us on daylighting. This companion presentation to our USGBC Texas Best Practices app will examine why is the Best Practices app needed, what is the Best Practices app, best practice specifics, and the business case opportunity. Why do we need the USGBC Texas Best Practices app? Lack of transparency and accountability. Built environment tenant businesses and inhabitants have no pathways to understand or quantify the impact buildings and communities are having on their personal health or business prosperity in dollar cost benefits or burdens. Inhabitants must rely on anonymous professionals to be the best stewards of their health and prosperity. Definition: mandatory minimum codes. These are the minimum locally adopted industry standards that built environment developers, designers, contractors, and operators are legally required to achieve, and jurisdictions must enforce. Typically, mandatory minimum codes address fire, life safety, and energy efficiencies only, and are enforced inconsistently across projects and jurisdictions. Fact number one, it takes 3 to 7 years from their official publication for industry standards to be adopted by municipalities as mandatory minimum codes. Fact number two, it can take 5 to 7 years for municipalities to fully enforce the mandatory minimum codes they have adopted. Fact number three, the cumulative result of facts number one and number two is that buildings and communities are being created today that achieve minimum requirements 8 to 14 years behind and below recognized industry standards. Fact number four, of all the buildings we inhabit and in use today, less than 70% meet existing locally adopted mandatory minimum codes. Fact number five, an institutionalized lowest first cost minimum code mentality is pervasive in the built environment ecosystem and is preventing the design, construction, and operation of safer, healthier, more efficient, and more prosperous places for us to live, learn, work, and play. We know how to do better, but choose to do less. Achieving the minimum has become the highest expected maximum. Definition: professional standard of care. The professional shall perform its services consistent with the professional skill and care ordinarily provided by other professionals practicing in the same or similar locality under the same or similar circumstances. This means that the professional standard of care in your area is completely dependent on the skills of the professionals providing it and the enforcement of mandatory regulations. Definition: best practice. A design, technology, policy, or process that is believed to bring some measure of benefit when compared to lowest first cost minimum code alternatives. Definition: best practice business case. An analysis of a best practice that monetizes the short and long-term social, environmental, financial, and emerging equity net present value dollar cost benefits impacting our businesses, inhabitants, and communities. Fact number six, designs, technologies, policies, and processes currently exist, and if deployed today, would immediately and equitably create exponential social, environmental, and financial benefits for building owners, inhabitants, and our communities. We do not need to wait for something new to be invented. Fact number seven, The failure to implement and deploy proven best practices is not an availability, applicability, or appropriateness issue. It is a business case issue. Definition: proven best practice. An existing, mature, readily available, and deployable design, technology, policy, or process that can consistently prove positive social, environmental, and financial business case dollar cost benefits when compared to lowest first cost minimum code alternatives. Our USGBC Texas Best Practices app only considers proven best practices. Fact number 8, less than 15% of today's new construction projects implement any type of above minimum code proven best practices. Another example of lowest first cost minimum code mentality at its finest. Fact number 9, developers, designers, operators, and regulatory agencies are not held legally, professionally, monetarily, ethically, or morally accountable for the social, environmental, or financial burdens that buildings and community inhabitants must shoulder when existing proven best practices are not implemented. Fact number 10, over 80% of all buildings that will be in service by 2050 already exist today. The decisions we make today will have long-term impacts on future generations. Fact number 11, developers and city planners build what the tenant businesses and inhabitants demand. Building inhabitants and tenant businesses are unaware of the social, environmental, and financial burdens they are being forced to carry and therefore do not demand proven best practices. Our USGBC Texas Best Practices app makes transparent that burden so that tenant businesses and inhabitants can demand better. Conversations have changed significantly in the past few years. The conversation has gone from what is the cost to what is it worth? From should we do sustainability to how should we do sustainability? And the built environment ecosystem is demanding tools that help them compare the trade-offs of designs and strategies quickly, economically, consistently, and repetitively. Fact number 12. A very large community of professionals, advocates, and activists are passionate about know-how and are attempting to deploy proven best practices every day. Most developers, architects, and municipal planners don't wake up every day excited about creating another minimum code, lowest first cost project. Many of these knowledgeable and passionate professionals make up the members of USGBC Texas. USGBC Texas supports other professionals seeking to deploy proven best practices through its mission, which is built on equity, health and wellness, resilience, and sustainability. The USGBC Texas mission is focused on uniting all stakeholders involved in the development, design, construction, operation, and use of the built infrastructure to achieve equitable practices and policies that are economically, environmentally, and socially sustainable. Our USGBC Texas Best Practices Committee supports this mission by accelerating the deployment of sustainable, proven best practices equitably in all sectors of the built environment by creating tools, communication pathways, and strong professional community relationships. What is the USGBC Texas Best Practices app? The USGBC Texas Best Practices app provides all built environment ecosystem stakeholders unfiltered and unbiased access to defendable, globally recognized analysis and methodologies, proving the business case substantiations essential for justification of immediate deployment and sustained enjoyment of proven best practice benefits. The USGBC Texas Best Practices app makes material the social, environmental, financial, and emerging equity performance outcome impacts of our built environment ecosystem decisions in monetized dollar cost benefits and dollar cost burdens language. The USGBC Texas Best Practices app exposes the full social, environmental, financial, and emerging equity cost burdens that minimum code lowest first cost design, construction, and operational decisions place on our businesses and community inhabitants in net present value dollars. Local professional standards of care deficiencies are made transparent. The USGBC Texas Best Practices app connects built environment creators, influencers, and inhabitants directly to our passionate and knowledgeable best practice champions, who will show them how to emulate their superpowers, allowing immediate deployment of proven best practices in their buildings and communities. Our USGBC Texas Best Practices app supports green rating systems deployment by substantiating the business case for projects, social, environmental, financial, and emerging equity impact cost benefits up front, allowing stakeholders to commit to green rating systems that most closely support their business's prosperity. I will now turn the presentation over to Shivani, and she will tell us all about the benefits of daylighting.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the USGBC Best Practices app discussion on quality of daylight. I'm Shivani Langer. I am on the board for USGBC Central Texas Council, and I'm the Green Schools co-chair for the council. I'm also a principal and regional sustainability leader with Stantec Architecture. And what you're going to see today is the research that was done under Stantec's research and benchmarking program. So what we're going to talk about today is what determines a good quality daylight. How do we define good quality daylight? And as we all know, I think the common belief for daylight is that more glazing equals better daylight, and we are going to question that today. Before I start talking about the analysis, I wanted to just show some of the metrics that are out there that are being discussed in lots of green building rating systems like LEED and WELL, primarily LEED version 4 and 4.1 and WELL rating systems, and also some of the metrics that are being discussed in the industry when it comes to daylight. So the first metric is spatial daylight autonomy, commonly known as SDA. And in layman's terms, that is the quantity of daylight. It is primarily talking about percentage of area that receives a specific amount of illuminance. And the thresholds are defined by LEED and WELL. One of the thresholds is 40% of the spaces. So we'll remember that. The other metric that we talk about is annual sunlight exposure. In layman's terms, that is glare. So it talks about percentage of area that exceeds a specified illuminance level. So it is talking about exceeding illuminance level. So it's glare. And the threshold is 10% in some of these discussions. The useful daylight illuminance is an illuminance level that takes into account both SDA and ASC in one metric. This is talked about a lot in daylight with lighting designers. This useful daylight illuminance is a metric that is commonly discussed as one single metric rather than two different metrics of SDA and ASC. And then daylight glare probabilities are just models. They are very visual models that show us what glare looks like in a space. So in the research that we analyzed in the research and benchmarking program, we said, hey, okay, let's see if more glazing equals better quality daylight. And in doing so, we took 5 different scenarios of glazing in a classroom. You can see here that the glazing percentage ranged from 52% window to wall ratio to 28% window to wall ratio. And they were also all different configurations of the glazing design. So some of them had just the upper glazing. So 4 and 5 are very similar, 28 to 29% window to wall ratio, but they were different configurations. Then we we ran simulations, we ran the analysis, and we used LightStanza for a lot of this analysis. That is a software, LightStanza software for analysis. And we looked at SDA, which is the amount of light. And like I mentioned, the threshold is 40 to 75%. And what we wanted to show here is that you can see that even the highest threshold, which is 75%, that LEED and WELL ask for, that they say, hey, if you get more than 75% or even more than 40%, you're pretty good in a space. And look, for all of the scenarios that we looked at, we were even higher than 75% for SDA, spatial daylight autonomy. So the amount of daylight was great in all the scenarios. And then we looked at glare, ASC, annual sunlight exposure, and the threshold is 10%. So if you have more than 10% of annual sunlight exposure, you have to prove a way to stop that exposure. So you have to prove how you're stopping glare in a space. And you can see that from 28 to 52, we are mostly all of the cases are higher than that 10%. And if you look at those three colors, basically we did look at exterior sunshade and light shelves, and no exterior sunshades and light shelves, and just exterior sunshades, no light shelves. So we looked at all the scenarios, and you can see most of the scenarios, the glare was much higher. And then useful daylight, the metric that I talked about that takes into account both the sunlight exposure and SDA. And if we look at that, you can see that actual useful daylight illuminance is higher in the lower percentage of glazing as compared to the highest percentage of glazing. So we are pretty good even when it comes to 28% window to wall ratio. And we also ran the daylight glare probability models, and you can see very clearly, how much of glare can be seen by a person inside of that classroom, and it's substantial in some cases. So we do need to look at the discomfort that the glare brings to occupants. And the percentage of glare of the probability of glare, which is intolerable, goes all the way from 10% to 18%, even in the 28% window to wall ratio. We are already talking about a 19% intolerable glare at a certain instance. But as we go to 52% window to wall ratio, as we go to wall windows in a classroom, that intolerable probability raises to 36%. So we are truly making the conditions intolerable at certain times in that classroom. So then the question is, why more? So, when 28% window to wall ratio gives us a good amount of daylight autonomy, why do we need to go higher? When 28% reduces glare substantially without needing to add any sunshades or blinds, then why go more? And then also latest energy codes recommend the window to wall ratio to be around 30%. And that's why we didn't even go lower than 28%. There is no reason for us to not have daylight. I mean, the importance of daylight is absolutely not contended here. We are just talking about why more than what is a good quality daylight, and seems like 28% has a much better quality daylight as compared to 52%. In this discussion, the common belief is more glazing equals more light, but truly more glazing does not equal better quality daylight, and it has to be looked into to ensure that we are thinking about the true quality of daylight. But one other thing that we wanted to look into is why did we look at larger glazing? And there was, again, a belief that more daylight equals more light energy savings. And that's why there was a lot of lots of glazing that we installed, especially in a classroom setting, because that was the belief. So we said, okay, let's look into that. And when we look at it, yes, it made sense. In 2012 IECC code, the lighting power was 1.2, allowable light, the lighting power allowance was 1.2 watts per square foot. But as we moved to 2015 IECC code, that substantially reduced to 0.87, but an additional efficiency package lowered it to 0.77. There was a substantial amount of reduction in the lighting power allowance between those codes. And that was truly the tipping point where we had to realize, is the amount of daylight truly helping us with energy savings? So we designed 2 different elementary schools in a period of a couple of years. And we saw that these were all resites. So the same school being resited, it was a prototype being resited in multiple locations. And the 24, so that elementary school after the 2023 number elementary school was 57% better because it was designed under 2015 IECC. And it was actually 68% better than the 2009 IECC code in terms of the lighting power allowance. So the question we asked ourselves is, how much is daylighting actually contributing to energy reduction? So if you look at it, because of high efficiency LED lighting that we have to incorporate to meet 2015 IECC goals, the pie that we save in energy reduction from daylight harvesting is much less as compared to what we used to be able to save through in a school that was designed under 2009 code. So that is where this discussion is very relevant as to, are we truly saving as much as we thought? And it is not as much as we thought because of the high efficiency LED technology that we're using, which is determined by the new energy codes. So yes, that was what we wanted to talk about. We wanted to make sure this is understood, that quality of daylight truly is not just about the amount of daylight, and also discuss how code and daylights go hand in hand. Daylight savings may not be as high because of the new energy codes. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. And definitely reach out to any of the best practices champions. We are all passionate and knowledgeable about best practices in buildings. And we would love to hear from you. If you go to the committee tab under the app, you can gain access to the best practices champions list. And please reach out, and USGBC Texas Best Practices Champions are here to help you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shivani. Now let's examine how the USGBC Texas Best Practices app allows us to have a different business case discussion. The Best Practices app incorporates a number of very unique and powerful features that allow us to evaluate almost all design characteristics that impact performance outcomes for both building and site, and put those in financial, social, and environmental buckets that allow stakeholders to evaluate which proven best practices they should spend their money on. Project impacts and co-benefits are evaluated through peer-reviewed literature. Assigned valuations and outputs are loaded into the app. For illustration purposes, we're going to talk about the office building that is modeled in the app. The climate modeling, carbon and pollution is for Houston, Texas. This is a 350,000 square foot, 14-story professional office building. We have conducted a 50-year triple bottom line cost benefit economic analysis with net present values all brought back to 2022 years. There's 1,500 employees with average salary and benefits of over $105,000 a year. That is $7.9 billion of benefits over the 50-year life cycle of the building. For comparison, the total energy use of the building is $27 million over that 50-year period. That means that energy costs are 0.35% of the total building business's benefits cost. Why this is important is the typical professional office building operational cost spends less than 1% on energy. That tenant business spends 90% of its operational annual budget on staff, salaries, and benefits. Let's enter the app. The app has both the opportunity to evaluate proven best practices within a Houston, Texas middle school or a Houston, Texas professional office building. Simply choose which building type you want to evaluate and pick your best practice, in this case, daylighting. Once you select your best practice, the default social, environmental, financial, and total benefits for the better solution will appear. The 0 is the minimum code alternative. And then you have the social, environmental, and financial, and total triple bottom line cost benefit analysis, NPV, shown here. Turning your smartphone or device into landscape mode allows you to see this information in more detail. No minimum code exists for daylighting. This means that inhabitants are not entitled to be provided any natural daylight. However, to be humane and model this conservatively, our minimum code baseline in the app gives 55% of the occupants access to appropriate daylight. For the better alternative, that increases to 75% and a 2% lighting energy savings. For the best alternative, 100% of the occupants get access to appropriate daylighting, and there's a 4% lighting energy savings. We're going to dig deeper into the data that's behind the information that I just showed you in the app. 0 represents the lowest first cost minimum code baseline. The better daylighting alternative in the app has a CapEx of $150,000 above the lowest first cost minimum baseline. The best daylighting alternative has a added CapEx of $300,000 above the minimum code lowest first cost baseline. Now we're going to add the financial savings from electricity. 2% better for the better daylighting option and 4% better for the best daylighting option. The net financial graphs here show the first cost and energy savings impact. They're both negative, and this is why the myopic focus on lowest first cost rules out daylighting instantly. What doesn't typically get evaluated in the lowest first cost scenario is the value of the carbon emissions that are removed from the community because of the higher efficiency. There is also a value for the air pollution burden that's been removed from the community because of the higher efficiency. Here we look at the productivity, and as you can see, the other upfront capital costs, carbon emissions, social value of air pollution, and financial savings from electricity pale in comparison. All of this value then from these best practices goes directly to the tenant businesses. Adding in the health impact makes it painfully obvious that spaces where tenant businesses are not afforded the opportunity to have good daylighting does hinder their businesses' prosperity and their employees' health. Looking only at the upfront financial decision, it's obvious that daylighting does not look that attractive. However, when these decisions are being made, the tenant business is not in the room. When we look at the environmental impact of deploying proven best practices, it is more significant than the financial impact. But again, the community is not in the room when these decisions are being made. The Best Practices app makes transparent the full social, environmental, and financial impacts of projects to both traditional stakeholders and those previously excluded from the decision-making process. The building owner has made a very quick one-dimensional lowest first cost decision based on daylighting. The community is not at the table, and the project team cannot be forced to deploy any proven best practice, let alone daylighting, that's above minimum code that would remove this burden from the community. And the tenant businesses and inhabitants of our communities and buildings have been unaware that decisions are being made that preclude them from the benefits that are possible with the deployment of proven best practices. Other features of the app is that it allows you to compare not only one best practice, better alternative against a best alternative, it also allows you to compare one best practice to another best practice. This business case substantiation then becomes even more important if you were, say, a tenant business looking to move into a building and you had $500,000 to spend on either daylighting or higher energy efficiency. That same money has a completely different impact on your business's bottom line. Here we can see a significantly different outcome to the tenant business for their investment. The energy efficiency option or investment brings no real value to the tenant business's profitability or prosperity. If you are the owner of the building, however, and cannot sell these benefits to the tenant businesses, you're only looking at lowest upfront first cost. In this case, the daylighting best practice results in a negative $35,000, whereas the energy efficiency option shows a positive $3.7 million over the life of the property. This graph then represents how the best practices fall out with respect to increased first cost and the total net present value across the social, environmental, and financial value that they bring. We can compare, for example, here, a better water efficiency to the best water efficiency possible above minimum code, or we can compare the best energy efficiency to the best daylighting. This allows us to make more informed decisions and allows us to align our business model with our employees' health and our prosperity. So far in this presentation, we have reviewed what the best practices app is. We've reviewed why it's important and how we create the business case and the value system to move forward in the deployment of proven best practices. This is the how section. This is how you engage with our USGBC Texas best practice champions, those passionate individuals who every day are working to deploy above minimum code proven best practices and are successful at it. You have direct access within the app to learn about our USGBC Texas best practices. Simply click the committee tab. You will be taken to our list of USGBC Texas best practice champions. Simply click on their name, details about who they are and their best practice superpowers appears. And if you want further information, click on the link that takes you to our USGBC Texas website database, where you can get in contact with that best practice champion. Access to all of our USGBC Texas best practice champions is free to USGBC Texas members, Texas school systems, and community-facing nonprofit organizations looking to solve built environment issues in their communities. So, in review, the Best Practices app makes material the social, environmental, financial, and emerging equity performance outcome impacts of our built environment ecosystem decisions in monetized dollar cost benefits and dollar cost burdens language. The USGBC Texas Best Practices app is business case performance outcome oriented. It reinforces a common value system based on net present value in dollars. It forces lowest first cost narratives to confront the net present value benefits or burdens of their decisions. No specialty green rating systems expertise is needed. And it gives previously excluded stakeholders access to data they can use to demand proven best practices in their projects. This is our call to action. We are all accountable, both individually and collectively, for the social, environmental, and financial burdens lowest first cost decisions create. You now have the tools and superpower accessibility needed to achieve a safe, healthy, efficient, and prosperous future. For further details on the USGBC Texas Best Practices app, you can go to the website shown here. Currently, the app is in Android platform only. If you don't have an Android app, you can go to our YouTube channel and there's a demo how the app works. Feel free to reach out to me if you want more information on the details I've shared here today, or to our Executive Director, Jonathan Kratz, who will help you get access to the Best Practices Champion database. Thank you very much.